Welcome to the Come Up Starter Kit, guys. My name is Shankar and I have a very special guest with me today, Theresa Dyson, who is a non-executive director for several boards for leading companies across Australia. Today, I have brought on Theresa to give us a bit of an insight about her career journey and what to expect if you are someone who would like to become a non-executive director. Thank you, Theresa, for finding the time, especially during these unprecedented times. How are you?
Yeah, thanks, Shankar, for the invitation. Going well, thanks. Happily in Queensland, and we sort of seem to be doing a little bit better than some colleagues elsewhere. So, yeah, just getting on with it, really.
Yeah, doing a lot better than us, which is good.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to jump right into it. As a quick introduction, how would you sum up who you are and your career journey in 60 seconds?
Right. So right now I'm a non-executive director. I have a portfolio of roles across ASX, public companies and state and federal government boards. My background is in law, so I had 25 years practicing in law, primarily in infrastructure, international finance and M&A. And I spread my career through Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne, sort of over the course of those 20 years. And I suppose the other element to what I am, I'm a mum with 2 teenage children, so also contributes to the fabric of daily life.
Very good. So very busy, very, very busy.
Yeah.
Just to say, very good. All right. So the next question is, how are you coping with the new way of life? Have you guys returned back to normal up there, and are you working from the office, or is it still all working from home?
So for me, because all of my roles are non-executive, I don't have a single office as such.
Okay.
So typically outside of these times, I would usually be sort of traveling around the country, you know, a couple of days, 2 to 3 days a week, different places for different meetings. So the way that I operate pretty much since March has largely been from home and on these sort of video meetings and calls and things. There's been a little bit of a return to attending in person anything that might be in Queensland. I had my first interstate flight 2 weeks ago, the first flight I've taken since March. So
Right.
went up to Townsville for a meeting, which was a very strange experience because the airport is quite different now, and the flying, you know, flying's always been a bit of a commute for me, not really very glamorous, but it sort of had an extra sort of level of just uneasiness, really.
Right.
So just with all the masks and things, so certainly not back to normal, and yeah, just really running everything primarily out of the home office.
Okay, very good. Okay, cool. And what is or was your golden nugget to staying sane during the lockdown?
So for me, it pretty much was exercise. I've got a cross trainer machine at home, thankfully. So even in the period where we in Queensland even had the sort of lockdowns where you couldn't really leave the house, I've had the machine for a very long time, but it's sort of seen more attention over the last 6 months, and which has been good. A good sort of side effect for me of the restrictions on movement. It's just meant that if I can start the day with something like that, then everything else sort of seems to make sense. And so hopefully it's a habit I keep up when things do return a bit more.
Okay, good. And so for the people out there, what is a non-executive board member and what does a day in a life look like for you?
Sure. So a non-executive board member is someone who sits on a board but is not sort of part of the business. So there's a distinction between non-executive and executive board members or directors. So many boards will have an executive, you know, managing partner or an executive director. They're usually someone like a CEO who also sits on the board, the sort of the leading sort of body of the organisation. Non-executive directors come from outside of the business, so it's necessarily sort of part-time for each of the different roles. You sit on the board, and typically there'll be something between 5 and 9 members of a board in most sort of cases, and that's across listed companies and government entities, typically in that sort of number.
Right.
And the board sort of operates to set the strategy for the organisation, to set the cultural tone from the top, to sort of go through some of the regulatory, particularly for listed boards and boards that report to entities like APRA, and that there's lots of regulatory responsibilities in of policies and keeping on top of a number of different sort of formal sort of elements of the running of the business. And then the board also agrees and sets the budget, and then from there everything sort of filters out in terms of operational expenses and things for the business to manage, projects, all of those sorts of things sit under the sort of strategy that's been set with a business plan, a budget, and then the different levels of authority that sort of flow down from there through the CEO management team and then out to all of the different operations. So the board is it's a strategic sort of entity. It has responsibilities to owners, so be they shareholders on the stock exchange or in terms of government, it'll be a state or a federal government sort of shareholder. The board has responsibilities to investing interests, so be they financiers or other sort of creditors of the entity. The board also has responsibilities to employees and sort of other sort of contractors, people who sort of work for the business, to customers or clients, and then also to the broader community stakeholders. So the board sort of sits at that level to understand where the business sort of sits in terms of its place in whatever the industry it's in and in the broader sort of community population.
Yeah, right. Interesting. Okay, very good. And so maybe let's start off with your journey, and so we can understand how you sort of became into the role of a non-executive board. I know that you studied law as well, and you spent the majority of your time there. But I want to give the people a bit of a taste of what was your very first job, and how did you sort of work your way up?
So my very first job was at Coles when I was
Right.
at school. So
Yeah.
if we're going that far back, I'm someone who, as soon as the age for being able to go out and get a job was, I sort of went down and put my name down and got my first job. So I suppose that sort of set the scene for working, for the rest of my career.
Yeah.
And then through uni, I had a lot of bar jobs and reception jobs, other sorts of things. But in terms of my sort of professional side of my career, I did study law. I did also an arts degree with English Lit and pure maths in that. Wow. So I sort of have a bit of an interest in a couple of different things. And then while I was sort of in my early years of working, just to complete the study sort of piece, I did a Master of Tax because that was an area I was interested in, and then a Master of Applied Finance, which was sort of because of the sorts of projects that I was working on at the time. So so I did study primarily the professional study was for law, and I did what was then called Articles of Clerkship in Queensland at a sort of small Brisbane firm for 2 years, and then 1 more year, and then I moved to Sydney to work at one of the large firms. I sort of had quite a long career there, about 16, 17 years at Blakes over its various names. Now it's Ashurst, and also with Blakes through Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. And the sort of work that I did was pretty broad, sort of based around, I suppose, applying sort of tax sort of structuring to international finance deals, structured finance, infrastructure particularly, and M&A. And then also sort of participating quite heavily in the pro bono and the charity sort of work that the firm was doing. So through that, I sort of moved through being a lawyer and then a senior associate and ultimately a partner at Blakes. Through the different sort of places that I worked, and I sort of found for myself it was really good that while I was at the same firm the whole time, there was always different sort of projects that I was working on, but I moved through different cities and different sort of roles once I became a partner.
Yeah, right.
So that was, I suppose, my professional journey, and then yeah, finished up with Blake's in Brisbane,
Yeah.
which is where I grew up. So moved back up here for family reasons. And by that stage, I had sort of been quite involved in a lot of industry bodies, particularly in relation to infrastructure and law. So, and ultimately, I sort of do say to people, I think if you're in an industry and you're, you know, you're interested in, you know, just getting a bit more involved, I think,
Yeah.
you know, just put your hand up. I'm not a fan of, you know, having a whole list of memberships of things that, you know, you don't really contribute to. I don't think being a passenger on an industry body is really all that useful. But if you pick a couple of things and you really get in and, you know, get involved and make some sort of impact and contribution, then I think for me certainly that's been very valuable in terms of broadening the, you know, the sort of sorts of people that I deal with, but also my own experience, and then ultimately I think that served me well for moving on to boards in my case. So
Wonderful.
so then after Blake's, and I was at Deloitte for 3 years, partner there, and yeah, and then I sort of decided to take on a different bit of a tack and move into non-executive director.
Okay. And how does one, so you've had sort of a very robust career, how did you make that pivot then into a non-executive director, and what were the things that you needed to do to sort of get into that position?
Sure. So it actually wasn't something that I would have said sort of 8 years ago even that it was where I would end up, but I was just offered a role on a Queensland government board for a company that has changed now, but it was part of the water utilities up here in Queensland, and I sort of took that on and really just enjoyed it. I enjoyed the strategy of it. I enjoyed looking at the whole of the organisation. Most of my work till then had been very, you know, transactional or project based, and which I really enjoyed. But this gave me a whole feel for, well, how does that fit into the whole of a business or the whole of an organisation, and what makes that tick? So I enjoyed that. And then I also was appointed to a federal government board, the Board of Tax, which I was a member and then chair of that board. And again, really enjoyed dealing with the different sort of stakeholders, understanding that that's more of a advisory sort of board, but it's sort of very much in the middle of, you know, business and government, and sort of really marrying the two up and having conversations at different sorts of levels than you do, again, on a transactional sort of basis. So I thought, well, this is something that I quite like. Put my hand up then again for another Queensland board, and it was at that point that I thought, well, I could either do this a bit half-hearted and keep my legal career and a couple of boards going, or I can give it a go and you know, and really sort of, you know, try this out as a full-time sort of thing in terms of building up a portfolio. And I'll say, look, it's not easy. I don't know many people who can sort of switch, you know, from being fully occupied in an executive or professional role to then being fully occupied in a board role. A lot of people do, you know, continue some level of consulting or something to sort of, or to continue to pay the bills, really, I suppose. But in terms of that, as a family, we sort of said, well, look, let's give it a year. Let's say we'll just go right at this full on. And if it doesn't really work after that, well, then I'll, you know, go back to law or do something else. But you know, let's give it a real concentration, a real shot. And I sort of had some goals about, you know, being a listed board, or at least sort of having some sort of pathway that I thought, you know, the plan was going to work. And I'd sort of picked up some, you know, some good sort of boards, but again, it wasn't going to be anything that would be sustainable. And did sort of second guess myself a bit around the September of the year, and you know, should I do this or not? And you know, sort of stuck with it, and then from the October of that year, it's a bit of a snowball effect. So you know, got the offer to join the Seven West Media Board at about that time, and then the Foreign Investment Review Board, and then so that sort of put me to the end of the year that I'd given myself, and I thought, okay, I'll do that now. And I sort of had, you know, the Energy Queensland Board at that stage as well. So so it meant that I was confident that I had a platform. It was something that I was going to be able to sort of keep going. But there is risk involved, I think, in
Right.
anyone, again, if you want to sort of really focus 100% on building a portfolio, then, the first couple, I think, it can be a bit scary about whether you get them or not.
Right.
And, in that time, through headhunters or through recruiters and things, you talk to people and, you think, oh, it'd be great for that board, and then you don't get it because there's so many, people who have all different sorts of experiences, and, the boards are going to want something or another thing. So, again, very early on, someone sort of gave me counsel that, you need to have a bit of a thick skin. It's sort of almost like,
Right.
leaving uni again, going for all those very competitive grad jobs, because, everyone's qualified. Everyone brings, something great interest to the table, and, one day it'll be you that they're interested in, and, you've got what they need, and many other days it won't be. It'll be somebody else. So in terms of pulling it all together, it can be a bit challenging, but once you sort of get rolling, I think, in many people that I've observed, and certainly myself, it does seem to take on a bit of a momentum. And so the point now that I'm sort of got quite a full book, which is quite good. Yeah.
Okay. I think one of the things that stood out, you are heavily involved in sort of the strategy of the business. And is that more so around you guys sort of, I guess, sit down and sort of want to understand where you want to take the business in the next 3 to 5 years, and what are the goals that you're trying to ascertain? Is that how it sort of works?
Yeah, sure. So usually there'll be a sort of, short, medium, long term sort of part of the strategic vision, and you'll sort of identify, what are the risks that can happen to mean that you won't sort of achieve that, and risk is a very important part of what boards do, sort of to monitor and understand what the risks of the business are, both at sort of broad operational level, like in some industries, particularly around health and safety and those sorts of things, but primarily around what are the risks that could stop us from achieving these objectives. So you do set out sort of some pretty concrete objectives for the current year. The current year usually tends to be built very much around the budget process. So you've got the budget for the year, and that sort of essentially really reflects what the strategy for that year is. And then you usually do look about 3-5 years out, sometimes a little bit longer, but all businesses are moving so frequently, and there's a lot of volatility at the moment that it's hard to look too much further. So you do then sort of set a strategy, say, well, how are we going to achieve that? What do we need in terms of human resources or digital resources or acquisitions, or do we need to just get rid of something? Is this part of the business not what we want to be doing anymore? So it's about sort of understanding those higher level sort of impacts on the way the business runs, and making sure that you focused all of the main attention of the organisation to achieve those objectives.
Okay. All right. Very good. And what made you want to become a non-executive board member?
Look, again, it was really the experience I had of the first board that I was on. So it wasn't something that I necessarily had thought about independently of that, but the experience that I had, and look, it's not for everyone. So a lot of people just love being, in the detail of, operational day-to-day, sort of working of organisations. But I really enjoyed the idea of sort of looking out at the whole of the business, at that strategy, at that risk sort of level, and really sort of seeing where you could take a whole of a business rather than, bits and pieces that you might, in an executive or professional career sort of be more in the day-to-day, just right in the workings of the business rather than sort of sitting out and sort of seeing how it all goes from the top. So that's what appealed to me.
Okay. And then just going back, when you first got into the first role as a non-executive director, did you have to apply for that particular role, or were you headhunted into that role? How did that sort of work?
Yeah, so that one, it was a Queensland government role, and I just sort of received a call pretty much out of the blue. They were putting a very new board together. So I've sort of, a lot of times you can track down, you can sort of see where some of the opportunities come from. I still haven't really quite worked that one out, I've got to
Yeah,
say,
right.
which isn't very helpful to anybody else. But it's yeah, I suppose it's all a bit of a consequence of, you know, if you're sort of out there in your community,
Yeah.
and, you know, if you're recognised as having some sort of qualities that, you know, in this case it was, you know, the government thought, you know, well, if she's interested, then, you know, it'd be great to have her on, even though I'd never been sat on a board like that before.
Yeah,
So
right. Okay.
yeah, which was a great opportunity. But I suppose then also I was on sort of boards of, you know, industry bodies and some charities
Yes.
as well, which I think is think about whether it's the sort of thing you would enjoy to be on a board. So
Yeah.
you know, if there's a not-for-profit organisation that has a cause that you really sort of connect with, then, you know, I think it's really valuable to go on to those sorts of boards. And similarly, taking roles in industry bodies, they don't have exactly the same sort of structure as boards, but you still get the idea of, you know, that sort of leadership, that setting the scene, setting a program of work for the organisation. If you're part of, you know, whatever industry you're in, there's always going to be those sort of roles. And again, they're volunteer roles, and you know, it's easy to sort of rack up a few because they might look good on a CV, but I think you get the best out of them if you have just a couple and really sort of, you know, really contribute and really, you know, get into it.
Okay.
I think personally you get more out of it, and also just the depth of relationships and experience that you have is better.
Yeah, okay, very good. I think that sort of leads on to the next question as well. Would you say that it is heavily important for people to be a part of these, I guess, memberships and what have you, if someone were wanting to pursue in becoming a non-executive board, or how would someone go about doing that if they were hoping to pursue a career in this?
Yeah, look, I think taking advantage of those sort of opportunities. I mean, other people, you know, might sit on a school or a kindy sort of board. You know, there's a lot of opportunities out there to get the feel for what it's like to you know, to be on that. Like, even, you know, if you're in a building a body corporate, or, you know, just some of those sorts of things, just to understand what it's like, and then you're able as well to articulate when you do come to going for, you know, a sort of, you know, a government board or an ASX board, or another sort of private company board, then, you know, you're able to sort of understand and talk, I suppose, with a bit more experience about, you know, how you approach being on a board. And, you know, because everybody comes at things from different directions, and everybody, you know, brings a different you know, lens to everything. And, you know, they're the sorts of things that you can learn sort of about yourself, but you can also communicate as a value to others. If you've just been able to pick up, you know, a couple of those sorts of experiences along the way. And again, it's usually sort of fairly, not necessarily easy, but there's usually a sort of easier path into some of those, you know, again, the not-for-profits, the school boards, the, you know, buildings, or you know, the industry bodies and those sorts of things. I think they're great sort of training ground, but also great to give yourself an understanding of if it's something that you're going to enjoy or not.
Okay, very good. So you're definitely a high achiever and had a robust career. What was your formula to sort of achieving great heights throughout your career?
So great heights sounds very lofty, but look, I think I'm a pretty hard worker, I suppose. I think I've got a pretty strong work ethic. So you know, I do tend to apply myself. If I'm doing something, I do throw myself into it. So whether it, you know, was my career in law, you know, I'm sort of pretty confident that, you know, pretty much all the engagements, I made sure that I was 100% on it, and, you know, it was going to, you know, we were going to sort of execute or see it through, or, you know, and again, any of those other sort of external commitments that I took on, you know, always mindful to not take on too much, but take on things that I knew that I'd be able to get in and sort of put in some effort, and, you know, and help out whatever the organisation was, but, you know, sort of, yeah, just not do things half-heartedly, I suppose. You know, just make sure that your full attention is for the thing that you're doing, and I don't know, it sort of,
Yeah, yeah,
it
no,
sort of works out. Yeah.
definitely. And when you were going through your career, what were some sort of hurdles that you may have faced throughout your career, and how did you sort of overcome them?
So look, I think everyone has, you know, different sort of hurdles or things that they come across. You know, you're not always going to be working with people that necessarily you like or that
Yeah,
like you, and that just happens. And you've got to sort of develop some strategies for being able to, you know, maybe sort of know that, you know, you're just not compatible sort of people in terms of friend or something, but, you know, you've got to find ways to be able to work with people and sort of understand people, and particularly if it's, you know, a boss or somebody who's sort of higher up, just work out ways that, you know, you can contribute in a way that, you know, that maintains your own authenticity, not
yeah,
to sort of change who you are, but that you can sort of do it in just reading people to understand, you know, what you can do to make sure that there's a smoother pathway through, you know, whether it's at work or whether it's in, you know, some other sort of body. And you know, I think in terms of, then again, like moving into the non-executive sort of role, I think you do have to, like I said, have a bit of a thick skin. You need to not take things too personally. A lot of the time, you know, there could be equal number of people who could do the role, and you just sort of, you know, need to know that every time it's not going to be you, and just sort of brush it off, and, you know, get back, sort of keep involved, keep turning up, and you know, and then sort of, you know, the thing will come that will be for you. And
yeah.
you know, that I sort of think a lot of the times that those sort of things do work out, you know, one way or another. And when you don't achieve, you know, a particular role in a particular time, you know, there's other opportunities that will work in a better way. So I suppose it's sort of a bit of a mindset thing, I think, really,
Yeah.
of just trying to, yeah, shake it off and get on to the next day, and yeah, keep
Yeah,
going.
no, definitely good advice. And what do you love most about being a non-executive director?
Look, I love, because I've got a range of roles across different sectors. I just love seeing all the different sort of industries, different sorts of businesses, you know, small, large, government, listed, and then, you know, picking out role, working in a particular way, and the way you can maybe apply it in a whole totally different sort of industry, or, you know, a bit of a, you know, tweak it around a bit, or hybrid it a bit, and you know, and something that perhaps that other industry never really thought of, because they
Right.
don't have that exposure. So, you know, ability to sort of look across a broader sort of scape, and then, you know, apply it in a way that is, you know, leading of the business, and, you know, setting some goals and strategy. And, you know, when the projects come off, it's terrific. It's a great sort of feeling. So yeah.
Okay, very good, very good. And what is your one piece of advice that you've learned throughout your career that you wish that you could tell your younger self?
I might have covered it already. I think it's probably about not being too hard on yourself. I think,
Yeah,
you know, every time, and again, particularly, you know, as a junior lawyer, or, you know, whatever sort of role you have, you know, in your early years, you're going to make mistakes, and, you know, you can be a bit hard on yourself, I think, in terms of overthinking everything, you know, over analyzing, and, you know, really sometimes it's just take the lesson, understand, and move on, and, you know, just sort of do it differently the next time. And I think that sort of not be too hard on yourself applies, I think, throughout, and as you sort of get further and further in careers. And, you know, about sort of, again, sometimes choices are made for you, but sometimes you can apply it as well to making the good choices yourself. And, you know, just sort of just knowing that, yeah, you can sort of work through most things, and you don't need to dwell too much on negatives that happen, or sort of the hurdles or the obstacles. I think, you know, learn something from everything, but don't let it sort of weigh you down, and just sort of
yeah.
understand and learn and move on. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time and insight, Teresa. It's been absolutely lovely speaking to you. And I know a lot of people will learn a lot from this, so thank you.
No, my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation, Shankar. It's been a great discussion.
Wonderful. All right, cheers.
Thank you.